Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Optimize your defenses to combat the threats that matter most. Sponsored by Interpres Security. My name is Mary Langolier of SANS. Today's featured speakers are Matt Bromiley, SANS Certified Instructor, and Michael Jenks, CTO and co-founder of Interpres Security. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary Lynn. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. It's great to have everyone here. Really, really looking forward to this. This is a really, really fun project that I got to be a part of. So first and foremost, Mike, thanks to you for letting me hang out with your team and learn a little bit more about how Interpres does what they do. But I'm really excited today, everyone, because this is not only kind of a company and a capability that I've been wanting to track for a while. It's also something that I have wanted to have as a defender for many, many years as well. So there's a lot of really, really cool stuff that came out of getting me to walk through and get that first look at Interpres Security. And folks, the title of today's talk is Operationalized Threat Intelligence. I've got a really quick kind of an introduction to the problem statement that we're looking to solve here. But before I do, Mike, you want to take a moment and introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and appreciate the time. My name is Michael Jenks. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Interpres Security.
Awesome. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to, there we go. There's Mike and myself. You see what we look like both in picture and live on camera as well. So there's no doubt that we are who we say we are. All right. Well, first and foremost, I had a little agenda, but I'm going to jump right into kind of what I think the problem statement here is, which I loved that I was able to walk through and see how this particular thing was being solved, how this issue was being dealt with. But we have to start with really what is a very, very vast threat landscape that's out there. And this is not an easy or light statement to make whatsoever. It is a widely hard to differentiate, hard to analyze sometimes. I mean, I as someone who speaks to threats every single week as to what's going on here, the number of different topics that I go through, and I don't even scratch the surface on what adversaries are capable of doing simply because I would still be talking from the first week is, definitely an indication that there's just a lot of stuff to manage out there. And one of the things that I've noticed as a defender over the years is the different types of questions that organizations have to solve. The first one being, how do we prioritize the threats that matter? But then the second one being subsequently reporting on readiness as time goes on. Because here's the thing. Any sort of we are defended against XYZ statement is a point in time at best. It's a point in time statement that simply says, I know as of right now, this moment, we are defended against thing, against adversary, against tactic, against technique, against whatever. That's a point in time statement only because as environments continue and as time rolls on, you're going to get new users, old users. Someone's going to leave an RDP session open. Someone's going to change their password. Someone's going to accidentally misconfigure a firewall port that should not be there. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen here. And that can take that point in time assessment and say, not anymore. And unfortunately, that makes it tough for organizations. The second part of that, which was the first bullet I laid out here, was how do I, as an organization, focus my security posture and my team on the stuff that actually matters? There's so many different threats out there. How do we prioritize? How do we actually figure out, like, okay, these are the ones I need to defend against? And I got a chance to get a first look at Interpres, who goes and a continuous threat exposure platform that simplifies the comparison of the threats that matter against your security posture. And I highlighted threats that matter primarily because this is the most important part of this distinction. There are, let's just say for easy mathematical sake, let's just say there's 100 different threat actors out there at a high level. I know there's more, there might even be less, who knows? But let's just say it's 100, all right? Not every organization, not every security team in the world needs to be concerned at the same priority level about every single one of those 100. And this is a natural thing. Sometimes threat actors target different industries, different nations, different sectors. Sometimes it's more opportunistic hacking versus long-term, long-tail APT. Sometimes it's financially motivated ransomware. Sometimes it's you had a Citrix instance that was insecure, and that was all it took for you to end up on a target list. The point being, how do we go through and actually prioritize and say, what are the threats that matter to me? And I'm happy to say that this is where Interpres comes in and helps you take over. So 2 problem statements I put forward here, and I'm going to go briefly over how I saw them being answered. And I'm going to hand it over to Mike to walk us through. The first one being the problem of continuously ingesting threat reports or raw intelligence feeds and trying to make them actionable is such a tedious task. It's not a surprise it doesn't work. Interpret's solution here is to examine the key attributes, identify the targets, the industries, the TTPs, and combine that into an assessment that can be used to advise organizations on attacks they'll face. A huge distillation of information that can be brought down to an easily consumed capability or an easily consumed level. I absolutely love this feature and capability. The second one I'm going to call out is, there we go. The second one I'm going to call out, as I mentioned in my little intro, was that your security posture can fall out of alignment due to unforeseen actions. This is where Interpres really comes through and continuously monitors the environment, continuously assessing the controls that are in place versus those threats that it told you about. And by focusing on those defensive capabilities, helps prioritize your team and say, hey, here's what you need to focus on next. Here's where we're going to find the most action. Here's what to look out for. So with that said, Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you take us through a little bit more, and maybe we'll hear a better take on how Interpres does what it does.
Yep. Get back up a slide. That'd be great. But
Matt,
thank you so much. And I love your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
I'll just jump into this though. So again, Interpres, the problems that we're after, right, is this idea of this holistic understanding of an environment continuously. We find ourselves in the product space known as continuous threat exposure management. So again, why are we here? Well, we believe today's approach to assess defensive capabilities is broken, but why, right? A lot of this process is very time consuming, extracting threat intelligence from various advisories, breach reports, et cetera, and then operationalizing it. There's really no holistic view that's tying together these ecosystems of on-prem, cloud, various vendor-provided ecosystems, Microsoft, Palo, et cetera. Especially, there's really no way to quantitatively measure readiness down to that detection, visibility, and tool configuration level mapped to, again, prioritize threats. And again, why? It's because all of these tool sets are fantastic in their own right. And what they do at scale is amazing. Your EDR to your network sensor, et cetera. But really, that's all contained to that ecosystem. So what we're doing is bringing that all together in a holistic view that allows decision makers to make decisions around, how protected, what is their exposure from that quantitative level, and really drive down that exposure risk in the most efficient and systematic process possible. So core components and capabilities of Interpres, first and foremost, is around defense readiness, which again is, as these advisories are released, we're really providing that instantaneous analysis of those advisories, of those breach reports that allows teams to move immediately into remediation versus days and weeks of exposure risk. Defense surface optimization, whereas once we baseline an environment, we'll provide recommended actions with regard to detection logic to implement, additional visibility to collect in the form of security logs, also tool configurations that would have a most optimized sense to drive down that exposure risk from those prioritized threats. Also, prioritized vulnerability intelligence. So not all CVEs are created equal. Right, so we're looking at not only the EPSS score, but the CVSS score, exploitability, but also layering on a prioritization from that threat-informed defense methodology. And then ultimately, since we connect to all of these different tool sets within the environment, we provide insight into stack and product rationalization decisions around the value that they're providing from that prioritized threat coverage perspective. So we have to ask, how time consuming was it for your organization to understand defensive readiness against the onslaught of advisory and breaches that happened this year? Some major ones were Clop ransomware, the Citrix, 0-day that was out there, et cetera. So what we're able to do and what we're hearing from our customers is the bigger the environment, the bigger the problem. But we're able to drive down an understanding of readiness that allows them to move into remediation, whereas it was taking them anywhere from days to weeks down to hours and minutes. Again, it's all about speed and understanding to drive down that exposure risk as quick as possible and to ensure readiness is bolstered in areas of concern. So, the usual workflow of why this takes so long, days to weeks. Here's the usual workflow, right? You have a CISA advisory, breach report that's released. The threat intelligence team has to take that report. They have to parse out all of the pertinent information, whether that be the adversarial techniques, the malware families, the vulnerabilities, recommendations as far as logs to collect, detections to implement, mitigations, et cetera. Then they have to take that and pass that to an operational team that has to log into each and every individual tool set to understand configuration, log collection, detection capability. Again, all very manual, time intensive, and static in nature. Generally results in something that looks like this. If you were to ask us who our main competitor is, we would point to Microsoft Excel, right? Because there's really nothing out there that's doing this continuously and bringing all of this information together in one place to understand defensive readiness against the threats that are targeting you. So how do we go about doing it? So Interpres connects via read-only API to all of your different security tooling. We then layer on finished threat intelligence. So that's something to point out. We are strictly dealing with tactic, technique, procedure level threat intelligence. And then we're modeling that based off of various aspects of your organization. That could be industry vertical, geolocation, size of the organization, type of data you protect, et cetera. And that helps us to prioritize and baseline and understanding your readiness against the threats most likely to target you. That's how we arrive at that baseline exposure score. And from that baseline exposure score, we would then provide recommended actions that would have the most bang for your buck to optimize the tool sets that you already have included in your ecosystem of defensive capability. One last slide here before I jump into the demo, because I know we're running up on a little bit of time. I do want to do the demo, but keep this in the back of your mind. So Interpres is all about relationships. So I think we can all agree you have this threat landscape that's out there. It's ever evolving, ever changing. You have these elements of threat, whether they be threat actor groups, campaigns, malware, toolkits, techniques, vulnerabilities, and they're all interrelated, right? You also have the inverse defensive elements. So assets have exposure to vulnerabilities, right? You have, if those vulnerabilities were to be exploited, there's post-compromise adversarial techniques and malware toolkits that come along with that attack chain. So what Interpres is doing is constantly analyzing these relationships between threat and defense to ensure that from a tool configuration, you may have enacted a setting that would mitigate execution of those post-compromise activities. Are you collecting the right visibility from a security log perspective? Once you have that visibility, do you have the appropriate detection logic to fire alerting if that activity were to occur? So at this point, I'd like to maybe pull down the slides and I can bring up the interface and walk through a little bit of
moving control over to you, Mike. I think we'll move control over so that you can get that. Should have it shortly, if not already.
Yep, I got it. Awesome. Let me know when y'all can see the interface.
Good to go, sir.
All right, perfect. So what I'll do is I'll walk through how we arrive at that baseline exposure score, and then I'll drive into the various use cases around understanding readiness, defense surface optimization, and vulnerability prioritization. So Interpres is a threat-centric platform. we recognize not all organizations are the same. So step one with Interpres is to establish a threat profile for your company. So LOC Industries is a fictitious company that we've staged for the demo environment. And what we recognize is organizations have unique aspects that make them more attractive targets than others for various threat groups, depending on things like industry vertical association, the size of the organization, geolocation of operations, the types of data that they protect internally or on behalf of customers, platform relevance, right? So, do you feature, Office 365, Mac OS? Do you have some ICS infrastructure, within the defended environment? So that's step one. Once we've established a threat profile for your organization, that allows us to prioritize these elements of threat. So specifically, the threat actor groups themselves, the malware families and adversarial toolkits, the adversarial techniques for MITRE ATT&CK, and then also various campaign data that we're ingesting from various national threat intelligence sources, vendor-provided breach reports, open source repositories, etc. So step one, threat profile. Step two, prioritize elements of threat. Step three would be to allow Interpres to analyze your defense tooling's readiness against those prioritized threats. So you would add your API integration via the interface here. Once you've provided those read-only API credentials, you would just allow Interpres to do its thing. So for something like a data lake, like Elasticsearch or Splunk or a SIEM, Interpres would connect, it would analyze the detection logic that's provided by that solution, automatically mapping it to MITRE ATT&CK. It would look at the log collection capabilities of the solution. And by virtue of that, Interpres understands the visibility that this tool provides. So in this case, connected to Elastic, identified that Windows Event ID 4656 was being collected. By virtue of that, Interpres understands that this organization has visibility into adversarial use of file access, process access, and industry registry key access. For something like CrowdStrike or an EDR, Interpres would be identifying the detection logic and the alerts as they're firing, mapping them to MITRE ATT&CK. We'd be looking at the configuration of that solution to understand the visibility and log collection capabilities it has, and then also provide tool-specific recommendations for anything from a policy and a configuration perspective that we find outside of the vendor-provided best practices. So step one, threat profile. Step two, prioritize elements of threat. Step three, allow Interpres to analyze readiness against those prioritized threats. And that's how we arrive at that baseline exposure score. That baseline exposure score is derived from, again, three subcategory scores: readiness against elements of threat, the techniques, malware families, toolkits, adversarial groups, campaigns. We'd be looking at asset exposure. So we're connecting to all of the vulnerability scanners from the endpoint to the cloud, bringing all of that in one place, and then layering on that threat-centric prioritization, which I'll get to in a moment in the demo. And then also defense surface. So looking at all of the log collection, the detection logic, tool configurations across the board. And we're able to trend that as that changes, as those relationships change from an adversary perspective or a defensive capability perspective, we're able to measure that over time and then provide specificity around exactly what changed down to that quantitative level that resulted in a net increase or decrease in that overall exposure score. So you can see in the activity feed here, exposure score decreased by 43, which is a good thing. But again, what exactly happened? You had some techniques that were mapped, so new detection logic came online. You had some vulnerabilities that were patched. You also had some net negative here, which is some visibility went offline from Splunk Enterprise Security, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So again, that's how we're arriving at this baseline exposure score, again, mapped to MITRE ATT&CK and prioritized threats. So diving into specific use cases, most certainly defensive readiness. Again, as these advisories are released, Big one over the summer was the Move It ransomware campaign, right? So Clop ransomware gang operationalized a vulnerability in the Move It software. And as this was released, right, to the it released an advisory. As you can see here, ton of information, right, that a threat intel team would have to dig through, understand readiness against all of these elements of threat contained in this report. But with Interpres, it would automatically parse and relate those vulnerabilities to this particular campaign. Understanding, do you have any assets that are exposed to that particular campaign? If so, immediately go patch. While you wait for those to be patched, if that CVE were to be exploited, what's those readiness against those post-compromise adversarial techniques? So the critical ones here: PowerShell, Windows Command Shell, Ingress tool transfer. But from a coverage standpoint, readiness standpoint, looking pretty good on PowerShell and Windows Command Shell. But Ingress tool transfer, there's some work to be done around visibility, detection, capability, etc. So understanding that there's 5 categories of telemetry, visibility to be had, 3 are being collected. There's additional collection to be had around network traffic content, network traffic flow. Since Interpres connects to all of your tooling from your endpoint across holistically and automatically maps those detections to the specific techniques, you can see that there are a total 60 detections across the infrastructure with regard to ingress tool transfer. 22 are enabled. There's 38 that are disabled that you could potentially re-enable, bolstering that level of readiness. We'll also provide reference detection logic that the team could simply copy and paste and inject into the sensing grid, again, bolstering that area of concern. From a defense surface optimization standpoint, once we baseline an environment, again, we would provide recommendations with regard to additional visibility to collect, additional detection logic to implement, etc. So in this case, we're saying, hey, you are completely blind to malicious module loads, right? So pivoting into that recommendation, we're saying, hey, we've identified 2 technologies, right? 2 SIMs within this infrastructure that has the ability to collect this visibility. The problem is the security logs are not being collected. So go collect sysmon of NID 7, and once you have that collected, Interpres would fire an alert on that activity feed, letting you know, hey, you have new visibility that is being collected that is related to these techniques that, again, you can go into that detection implementation workflow. Last thing I would want to point out before we jump into Q&A is, again, vulnerability and prioritize vulnerability intelligence. So we're connecting to all of those vuln scanners from, let's say, a CrowdStrike Spotlight to anything in the cloud, to a traditional vulnerability scanner like Qualys, Tenable, and we're bringing all of that in one place and saying that, hey, out of all of these, right, you need to pay attention to these high priority ones. Well, why? Well, super high EPSS score, super high CVSS score. It's been exploited already. And oh, by the way, there's campaigns that are targeting organizations like yours right now, some active campaigns. Go target go patch these 3,000 some assets. But from a general overview and going 1,000 miles an hour, that's an overview for a platform. And I'll stop here to leave some room for some Q&A.
And Mike, let's keep this up while I got you here. And I'm going to give our audience a chance to submit any Q&A they might have. So folks, the Q&A window is open here in Zoom if you'd like to send any questions through. Hey, Mike, click on that button, do this thing and whatnot. Before we do that, though, since I got the platform up here and I know you know it so well, I wanted to take a moment to maybe just kind of dig through this a little bit further or maybe after this. Could you go down to those heat maps that you've got there?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I absolutely love these here. So for anyone who's looking at these and it's kind of like, whoa, what the heck? I've never seen something this way. First off, I just want to first point out that one of the things that you guys do over there at Interpres is I think you give organizations a new way to look at their at their security posture, a new way to look at their defenses. And it's one thing to say, and I won't belabor this point. However, it's one thing to say, oh, we're defended against multiple types of MITRE attack techniques. right? It's one thing to say that and then have a spreadsheet, but folks, take a look at that prioritized technique content. That right there is a straight up representation of, and I love the visualization of it too, of the various types of techniques out there and what your defenses might actually look like. And then I was going to ask you to click in on one, Mike, just to see what that granularity looks like. Anything you want to expand on there?
Yeah, totally. So the way to, I guess, what we're trying to communicate here is the size of the rectangles is priority. So the bigger the rectangles, the higher the priority. And then the coverage is communicated through the color. So you can see here in the gray, in the red, right, some areas of concern that the team could, look into, providing additional visibility, additional detection logic, et cetera. So, looking at, exploit public facing application. As you can see here, the visibility is a major concern, right? There's two categories of telemetry and visibility here, but we're not collecting any of it. So being able to pivot into, let's say, application log content, you can see here that there's a ton of logs that are out there in this ecosystem. The problem is, they're not making their way into Splunk or the SIM, within this infrastructure. So again, just an easy way to visualize areas of concern and then pivot into ways to rectify that quickly.
Awesome. And we did have a question come through. Someone asked, is it possible to use the platform for threat modeling?
So threat modeling for sure. So, I mean, we're looking at, so let's say, I guess you could do that in a variety of ways, right? So depending on your starting point, from a threat group perspective, you would be able to, let's say APT28, pivot into that. And again, Interpres is all about relationships. So what we would provide you is, from a historical perspective, APT28 is known for leveraging these, high priority adversarial techniques. Being able to spot areas of strength, areas of weakness, being able to target, that modeling across the environment, and just be able to have that awareness around, areas of concern to bolster, right, before that becomes a major issue. Also, from purple team scoping, red team scoping, et cetera, we've had customers, leverage this as far as being able to really scope down, areas of concentration, toolkits, adversarial malware families, techniques that they want to focus on, and just being able to really understand, that readiness factor against all of these different elements.
Absolutely. I love it. What an awesome way to frame that too, and a great way to kind of assist. I really look at this as if I'm an organization, and let's be clear, right? There's plenty of organizations out there. They've got security folks on hand. They've got some tooling and technologies in place. They've got the people, the processes, right? They're not starting from scratch, if you will. But then it becomes that question of like, well, how do I hone and focus my defenses correctly and make sure that I'm not suffering, things like defensive drift and whatnot. So awesome insight there. I love it. We are just about at time, Mike. I wanted to see if you had maybe, last 30, 60 seconds or so, anything final parting words for our audience here, anything else you'd like to say about the platform?
I mean, just thanks for the time. And I hope this really resonates because it came from pain points over my professional experience in the various SOCs that I've worked, just defending, a lot of critical infrastructure over the years. So just that awareness, just that manual process of operationalizing threat intelligence. If that resonates and spreadsheets resonate with you, I really encourage you to, give us a call. We'd love to have you take a test drive.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being here with me today. Absolutely awesome overview. I loved getting a chance to kind of see how everything worked. And I thought, y'all are doing awesome stuff with the platform. So thank you. Mary Lynn, I'm going to hand back to you to take us home. But again, everyone, thanks for joining us here today on behalf of myself and Mike over and the folks over at Interpres. It was great to have you here. And, feel free to check out the associated paper with this too, where we dig a little bit deeper into that first look.
Thank you so much, Matt and Michael, for your great presentation. And to Interpres Security for sponsoring this webcast, which helps to bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.